Sarah Miller arrived at the military boot camp early in the morning, carrying a heavy backpack that seemed almost as big as her. The cold wind brushed against her face as she stepped off the transport truck, her heart pounding with nervousness. Around her stood tall, confident recruits laughing, shouting, and boasting about their families' military backgrounds. Sarah stayed silent, clutching the strap of her bag tightly. She looked small compared to everyone else, but her eyes were sharp, filled with quiet determination. When she entered the training yard, she immediately felt dozens of eyes on her. A few recruits whispered, some smirked, and others laughed openly. One boy in the front said loudly, "Are you sure you're in the right place? This isn't a summer camp." The others laughed, and Sarah forced a small smile, pretending not to care. Inside, though, her stomach twisted. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. She had been through worse, but she didn't want attention. Not yet, not until she proved herself. The sergeant shouted commands, his voice echoing across the field. "Drop your bags and form a line." Everyone hurried to obey. Sarah followed, standing at the end of the line. When the sergeant walked past her, he stopped and looked her up and down. "You look like you belong in a library, not in a boot camp," he barked. The recruits laughed again. Sarah kept her eyes straight ahead and replied calmly, "Yes, sir." That simple answer annoyed the sergeant, but something about her steady voice made him move on without another word. The first day was pure chaos. Recruits ran laps until their legs trembled, crawled through mud, and shouted responses to every command. Sarah struggled to keep up at first. Her arms hurt, her knees scraped against the gravel, and her lungs burned. A few recruits whispered jokes as she fell slightly behind during sprints. "Told you she wouldn't last," one of them muttered, but Sarah never stopped. Every time she fell, she got up. Every time someone laughed, she pushed harder. She wasn't trying to impress them. She was trying to prove something to herself. When night came, everyone was exhausted. They sat in the mess hall eating their bland meals, joking and complaining about the day. Sarah sat alone at the corner table, quietly eating her food. Her hands were red and blistered, but she didn't care. Across the room, she heard someone laugh. Maybe she thought this was nursing school, another recruit joked. Sarah's fork paused for a second, but she said nothing. She finished her food, stood up, and left. That night, when everyone else was asleep, Sarah sat on her bunk, unwrapping a small piece of cloth around her arm. Beneath it was an old scar, faded but deep. She stared at it for a moment, her eyes distant. The memories flooded back. The sound of gunfire, the screams, the smell of smoke. She quickly covered it again and lay down, staring at the ceiling. No one here knew who she really was, and she wanted to keep it that way. The next morning, the sergeant blew his whistle at 4 a.m. Up, up. Let's see who's ready to become a soldier. Everyone rushed out of bed. Sarah was already awake. Her body ached, but she moved fast. During drills, she ran harder than the day before. Her clothes were soaked in sweat, but she refused to slow down. Some recruits began to notice. One whispered, "She's tougher than she looks," but most still didn't believe she'd last long. At the obstacle course, things got worse. She slipped while climbing a rope and hit the ground hard. Laughter broke out again. "You sure you don't want to go home?" someone shouted. Sarah stood up slowly, pain shooting up her arm, but she didn't answer. She grabbed the rope again and climbed, step by step, until she reached the top. When she came down, her hands were bleeding, but her eyes shone with quiet pride. For a brief moment, the laughter stopped. By evening, her uniform was dirty, her muscles screamed, and her entire body felt like it was on fire. Still, she stood straight during inspection. The commander walked past her line and said, "Some of you need to toughen up, or you won't last a week." His eyes paused on Sarah for a second. He didn't say anything, just gave a small nod and moved on. It was quick, almost unnoticeable, but she caught it. For the first time since she arrived, someone in authority hadn't looked at her with doubt, maybe even a hint of respect. That night, as the lights went out, Sarah lay awake again. She could still hear the laughter from the day echoing in her head, but it didn't hurt as much now. She knew people laughed when they didn't understand. They didn't know what she had survived. They didn't know that behind her quietness was a storm she had already faced and conquered. The days ahead would be hard, but Sarah wasn't afraid. She had faced real fear before. Fear that didn't come from drills or shouting sergeants, but from war itself. The recruits might see her as weak now, but she knew time would reveal the truth. The scar she hid under her sleeve was more than just a wound. It was a story of courage, pain, and survival. As she finally drifted off to sleep, a faint smile crossed her face. Let them laugh, she thought. One day they'll understand. The next morning began before sunrise, with the sharp sound of the whistle cutting through the cold air. Sarah jumped out of bed before most of the others had even opened their eyes. Her body still ached from yesterday, but she didn't complain. She quickly tied her boots, fixed her uniform, and joined the line outside. The ground was still wet from last night's rain, and a thick fog covered the camp. Everyone looked tired, but Sarah's face was calm, focused. The sergeant's voice roared through the mist. Today, we'll see who's made for this life and who needs to pack up and go home. His words sent a nervous energy through the recruits. They all wanted to prove themselves. For Sarah, it wasn't about proving anything to others. It was about proving that she still had the strength to keep going, that the past hadn't broken her spirit. The morning started with a long run. The recruits ran across uneven ground, carrying heavy rifles. Some groaned, some complained, and some tried to show off by running faster than others. Sarah ran quietly, breathing steadily, her steps in rhythm. Her legs felt heavy, but she refused to slow down. Mud splashed on her uniform. Her boots sank in the dirt, but she kept moving. A few recruits began to fall behind, but she stayed near the front, her face determined. When the run ended, most recruits dropped to the ground, gasping for air. Sarah was breathing hard too, but she stood tall, hands on her knees, waiting for the next order. The sergeant noticed. "You've got fight in you, Miller," he said roughly. She just nodded and replied, "Yes, sir." It was the first time anyone had acknowledged her effort. The next challenge was the obstacle course, ropes, walls, and mud pits designed to test their strength and willpower. It was the part everyone hated, but it separated the weak from the strong. Sarah stared at the tall wall in front of her, higher than anything she had climbed before. A group of recruits laughed quietly behind her. "Bet she can't even reach halfway," one said. Sarah ignored them, took a deep breath, and started climbing. Her hands slipped, and she scraped her arm, but she kept going. Inch by inch, she pulled herself up until she reached the top. She looked down at the others who were still struggling. For a brief moment, their laughter stopped. Then, without saying a word, she jumped down and moved to the next challenge. Hours passed like that, running, crawling, lifting, repeating. The training was harsh, designed to break their limits. Some recruits shouted in frustration. A few gave up and sat on the sidelines. Sarah never stopped. Her mind went back to the nights overseas. The sound of explosions, the cries of wounded soldiers, the feeling of helplessness she once carried. Compared to that, this pain felt small. Every drop of sweat reminded her that she was still alive, still capable. By noon, the sun was burning overhead. The recruits lined up for a shooting drill. Each was given a rifle and told to hit a target 300 meters away. For most, it was just another task. But for Sarah, holding the rifle brought back memories she wished she could forget. She took a deep breath and aimed carefully. Her hands trembled for a second, then steadied. She pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the target dead center. Silence fell around her. The sergeant lowered his binoculars, surprised. "Beginner's luck?" he asked. Sarah didn't answer. She just reloaded and fired again. Another perfect shot. The other recruits exchanged glances. The same people who laughed at her earlier now watched in disbelief. A few of them even started clapping quietly. Sarah didn't smile. She simply put the rifle down, saluted the sergeant, and stepped back. Inside, though, her heart was racing. Not from pride, but from the memories that shooting had awakened. Later in the evening, the recruits gathered in the mess hall. Their bodies were sore, but their spirits were high after surviving another tough day. Sarah sat quietly at her table drinking water. The same recruit who mocked her before walked over. "Hey, you were pretty good out there," he said awkwardly. Sarah just nodded. She wasn't looking for friendship or attention. All she wanted was to focus, to stay unnoticed until graduation. But staying unnoticed was getting harder. The commander himself had seen her progress. From his office window, he had watched her complete every task without complaint. He had seen many recruits break down, but not her. There was something different about Sarah. Something that didn't fit the profile of a new trainee. He made a mental note to keep an eye on her. That night, as everyone slept, Sarah sat alone outside the barracks. The moonlight shone on her tired face. She removed her gloves and looked at her hands. Blistered, rough, and scarred. But these weren't just training wounds. These were reminders of another time, another life she had lived in silence. She whispered softly to herself, "You can do this, just like before." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was strength in it. She wasn't scared of pain. She was scared of the memories coming back, but she had promised herself never to give up. Not again. The next morning, she was up before everyone else, already stretching and preparing for another day. The recruits who once laughed at her now looked at her differently. They still didn't know her story, but they couldn't deny her willpower. Sarah didn't care about their opinions. Every day was a test, not of strength, but of heart. She wasn't there to prove she could survive boot camp. She was there to prove she could face her past and come out stronger. Each step she took, each obstacle she conquered, was one more step away from her pain, and one step closer to peace. As the whistle blew again and the sun began to rise, Sarah smiled faintly. The trials were far from over, but for the first time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. Days passed and the recruits began to fall into a rhythm. The yelling of the sergeants, the early morning drills, the endless push-ups, all became part of their daily life. But even with the routine, tension never really left the camp. The instructors kept the pressure high to see who could handle real stress and who would break. Sarah, quiet as ever, became a strange mystery to everyone. She worked hard, never complained, and stayed to herself. Some recruits still teased her, calling her mouse or soft hands. But their words didn't reach her anymore. She had learned to block them out completely. One morning, during inspection, Commander Harris visited the camp. He was known for being strict, fair, and terrifying. His deep voice could silence a whole parade ground. The recruits lined up, standing as straight as possible. The commander slowly walked down the row, his boots hitting the ground with heavy, deliberate steps. His sharp eyes scanned every detail: uniforms, posture, weapons. When he reached Sarah, he stopped. She looked straight ahead, her rifle held tightly against her shoulder. The commander studied her for a moment, his brow slightly furrowed. "Recruit Miller," he said in a low, commanding tone. "Your stance is off. Who taught you to hold a rifle like that?" Before she could answer, one of the recruits behind her chuckled under his breath. The commander's head snapped in that direction. "Something funny, Private?" he barked. The recruit straightened immediately. "No, sir." The commander turned back to Sarah. "Show me your grip." She adjusted her hands, but her fingers hesitated slightly. Not from fear, but from something deeper, something that made her hand tremble for just a second. The commander frowned. "You won't hit anything holding it like that," he said coldly. "Drop and give me 20. Sarah didn't argue. She placed her rifle down gently, dropped to the ground, and started her push-ups. The dirt clung to her palms, and sweat rolled down her forehead. The others watched, some smirking, some feeling sorry for her. The commander stood over her, arms crossed. "In the field, one mistake can cost lives," he said. His voice wasn't mocking. It was the voice of someone who had seen it happen. When she finished, Sarah stood back up, saluted, and said softly, "Understood, sir." The commander nodded once and moved on. But as he did, something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she didn't argue or how she didn't break eye contact. There was no fear in her, only discipline and quiet strength. Later that day, during shooting practice, the commander returned to observe. The recruits were lined up at the range, each aiming at a target downfield. The wind was strong, making it harder to shoot accurately. The commander walked behind the line, watching everyone's form. When he reached Sarah, he stopped again. "Miller," he said, "you're up. Let's see if your grip matches your aim." Sarah took a deep breath, adjusted her position, and aimed down the sight. Her hands were steady this time. The trigger clicked, and the bullet hit the center of the target. The other recruits stared in surprise. The commander raised an eyebrow. "Again," he said. She fired again, another perfect hit. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at the target. Then he turned to her and asked quietly, "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before replying, "I've had some practice, sir." Her voice was calm but distant, as if she was hiding something. The commander looked at her closely, then nodded and walked away without another word. After the drill, the recruits crowded around her. "Hey, Miller, where'd you learn to shoot like that?" one asked, half curious, half impressed. "You're full of surprises," another said. Sarah gave a small smile but said nothing. Deep down, she wished they would stop asking. Every bullet she fired brought back memories. The smell of smoke, the cries of her old squad, the explosion that had changed her life forever. She didn't want to remember, not here, not now. That night, as the camp lights dimmed, Sarah sat on her bunk cleaning her rifle. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of metal clicking. Across the barracks, a few recruits whispered about the day. "Did you see the commander's face when she hit those shots?" one said. "Yeah," another replied. "He looked like he'd seen a ghost." Sarah's hands froze for a moment. The commander's face, yes, she had noticed it too. That look of recognition, confusion, maybe even fear. It wasn't just surprise at her skill. It was as if he had seen something familiar in her, something from another life. In his office, Commander Harris sat at his desk, staring at a file. It was Sarah's record, clean and simple. Too simple. New recruit, no prior combat listed. But her eyes, her shooting, her discipline, those weren't from a beginner. They were from someone who had already been through war. He closed the file slowly and leaned back in his chair, lost in thought. Back in the barracks, Sarah finished cleaning her rifle and placed it neatly beside her bed. She pulled the blanket over herself, staring up at the ceiling. Her mind wandered back to the field, the day everything went wrong, the mission, the ambush, the pain. She blinked away the images, forcing herself to breathe calmly. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring more questions, more tests. But she was ready. No one here needed to know the truth, not yet. Let them think she was just another recruit. Let them underestimate her. Because deep down, she knew one thing. Real strength doesn't come from muscles or medals. It comes from surviving what others couldn't, and still finding the courage to keep moving forward. As the lights flickered off completely, a faint smile touched her lips. The commander might suspect something now, but she wasn't afraid. She had faced worse than his anger. What scared her most was the possibility that someone might look past her silence and truly see the person she had once been. The night was colder than usual, and the sky above the boot camp was filled with dark clouds. The recruits were already tired from a long day of training when the whistle blew again. Everyone groaned, thinking it was a mistake, but the sergeant's voice cut through the air like thunder. "Night march. Full gear. You have 10 minutes. Sarah quickly grabbed her backpack and rifle. Around her, the recruits complained under their breath. "This is insane," one muttered. Another said, "It's pitch black out there." But Sarah said nothing. She tightened her boots and checked her flashlight. The night air was sharp, and the sound of the wind carried across the camp. The commander, Harris, stood near the trucks, his face hard and unreadable. "Tonight, we test not your strength, but your endurance," he said. 10 miles through uneven terrain. You'll move as a unit. If one falls, the rest help. No one gets left behind. His eyes moved slowly across the line of recruits and stopped briefly on Sarah. She met his gaze for a moment, then looked forward again. The march began. The group moved through the dark forest, their boots crunching against the dry leaves and stones. The only light came from the small flashlights attached to their rifles. The wind howled, and the night was filled with strange sounds, the rustling of animals, the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional cough or grunt from tired recruits. At first, everyone tried to keep pace, but within an hour, the group started to slow down. The heavy packs were cutting into their shoulders, and the rough ground made their legs ache. Sarah felt her muscles burning, but she kept walking steadily. Her breathing was calm and measured. Behind her, one of the younger recruits stumbled and fell. "I can't do this anymore," he said, clutching his ankle. Some of the others hesitated, unsure whether to stop or keep moving. The sergeant shouted, "No stopping! Keep moving!" But Sarah turned around, dropped her pack, and helped the boy stand. "Lean on me," she said quietly. He looked embarrassed. "I'll slow you down." Sarah shook her head. "We don't leave anyone behind. That's the rule." Together they kept walking. The others looked back and a few began to help too. Slowly, the entire group regained its rhythm. The commander, watching from the back, noticed. His eyes followed Sarah as she walked, supporting the injured recruit without a single complaint. Something about her movements, the quiet way she led, reminded him of someone he used to know, someone from a battlefield long ago. After several miles, the terrain became even harder. They had to climb a steep hill covered with rocks. The rain started to fall, cold and sharp against their faces. One by one, the recruits began to struggle. Sarah's arms were shaking from the weight of the injured boy, but she didn't stop. She focused on each step, each breath. Halfway up the hill, her foot slipped, and she fell hard onto the mud. The pain shot through her leg, but she pushed herself up again. The sergeant shouted, "Move it, Miller!" She didn't respond, she just kept climbing. Her clothes were soaked, her hands scraped, but her eyes burned with determination. By the time they reached the top, everyone was exhausted. The commander ordered them to rest for 5 minutes. Most recruits collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. Sarah sat quietly, her back against a tree, checking the injured recruit's ankle. "You're doing fine," she said softly. "Just a bit more and we'll be done." He nodded, grateful but too tired to speak. The commander approached her silently. "You didn't have to do that," he said. His tone wasn't angry, it was almost respectful. Sarah looked up. "If I didn't, sir, he might have been left behind." Harris studied her for a moment, his face thoughtful. "You've got the kind of discipline I wish more soldiers had," he said quietly before walking away. The words surprised her. She didn't need praise, but coming from someone like him, it meant something. She felt a strange warmth in her chest. Not pride, but recognition. When the march finally ended, dawn was breaking. The horizon glowed with shades of orange and gold. The recruits stood in formation, muddy, wet, and trembling from exhaustion. The sergeant paced in front of them. "Half of you wanted to quit tonight," he shouted. "But none of you did. Remember that." As he dismissed them, many recruits went straight to their bunks, too tired to even eat. Sarah stayed behind, helping the injured boy get to the infirmary. When she returned to her quarters, the commander was standing nearby, speaking with another officer. When he saw her, he nodded slightly, a silent gesture of respect. Inside the barracks, the other recruits were no longer whispering about her like before. One of them, the same boy who had laughed at her on the first day, said quietly, "You didn't have to help him back there, but thanks." Sarah gave a small smile. "We're a team," she said simply, then went to clean her muddy boots. That night, as everyone slept deeply after the long march, Sarah sat by the window, staring out at the faint light of the moon. Her body was sore, her legs ached, and her shoulders throbbed, but she felt at peace. The silence reminded her of the long nights she had once spent in the desert, tending to wounded soldiers, refusing to rest until everyone was safe. She closed her eyes and whispered, "No one gets left behind." The same words her old commander had told her years ago. The same man who didn't make it home. The memory stung, but it also gave her strength. Outside, Commander Harris stood by the training ground, lighting a cigarette. He glanced toward the barracks and thought about Sarah. There was something about her courage, her calmness under pressure, that stirred something deep inside him. A suspicion that this young recruit was not as ordinary as she seemed. The night march had shown everyone her strength. But for Harris, it had revealed something more. A hidden story behind her silence. And though he didn't yet know the truth, he could feel it. Sarah Miller wasn't just another trainee. She was a soldier who had already walked through the fire and come back stronger. The morning after the night march was quiet. The recruits were still half asleep when the whistle blew again, echoing across the cold camp. Everyone groaned, their legs sore and backs aching from the long march. Sarah, however, was already awake. She sat on her bunk, neatly folding her blanket, her face calm but pale. The night had been long, and her body felt heavy, but her discipline never wavered. She knew another test was waiting. There always was. After breakfast, the sergeant gathered everyone outside. "Today, you'll all go through medical checks before the next phase of training," he announced. "Make sure you report to the infirmary one by one." The recruits lined up, chatting quietly, some joking about how they hoped to get a few minutes of rest while the doctors checked them. Sarah stood at the end of the line, her hands behind her back, trying to stay unnoticed. When it was her turn, she stepped into the small medical tent. The air inside smelled of antiseptic and medicine. A young Army doctor greeted her with a tired smile. "Take a seat, Private Miller," he said. "We're just checking for muscle strain, dehydration, and injuries. You've all been through quite a bit this week." Sarah nodded and sat down. The doctor began his routine, checking her pulse, blood pressure, and reflexes. Then he asked her to remove her jacket so he could examine her shoulder, which had a faint bruise from the obstacle course. She hesitated for a moment but didn't argue. Slowly, she took off her jacket and lifted her training shirt slightly to show her side, where the bruise was. But as she moved, the doctor froze. His eyes widened slightly, his professional expression changing into one of shock. Just below her ribs, running diagonally across her side, was a long, deep scar, the kind of wound that could only come from shrapnel or a serious battlefield injury. It wasn't something that happened during training. It was old, healed, but unmistakably real. The room was silent for a few seconds. The doctor cleared his throat awkwardly and asked quietly, "Private Miller, where did you get this?" Sarah looked down, her expression unreadable. "It's old," she said softly. "An accident." But the doctor wasn't convinced. He knew the difference between an accident and a war wound. Without saying another word, he made a note on his clipboard and left the tent. A few minutes later, Commander Harris entered, his boots thudding against the floor. His expression was serious. He stopped in front of Sarah, who was now sitting straight, her eyes fixed on the wall. "At ease, Private," he said in a controlled tone. "Let me see it." Sarah hesitated again, then lifted her shirt just enough to reveal the scar. The commander's face changed instantly. His eyes, which were usually cold and sharp, softened with shock and disbelief. "That's not an accident," he said quietly. "I've seen wounds like that before. That's a combat scar." For a moment, Sarah didn't speak. The only sound was the distant whistle of the wind outside the tent. Finally, she said in a low voice, "It happened 2 years ago, sir. In Kandahar." The commander took a step back, stunned. "Kandahar?" he repeated, his voice heavy. "You were there?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I was a combat medic. My unit was ambushed during a rescue mission. I was the only one who made it out alive." Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes glistened slightly. "After the explosion, they told me I could never go back to active duty. But I couldn't stay away. So when this new enlistment program opened for former veterans, I signed up again, quietly." The commander stared at her, silent for a long time. He remembered that operation. It had been one of the worst attacks that year. Many brave soldiers had lost their lives. The realization hit him hard. This quiet, underestimated recruit had already been through real war. He finally spoke, his tone different now, softer, almost respectful. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Sarah gave a faint, sad smile. "Because I didn't want pity, sir. I didn't come here to be treated like a survivor. I came here to start again, to feel like a soldier again." The commander nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "You've got more courage than half the people I've trained," he said. "You didn't just survive, you came back." After a moment, he turned toward the door, pausing before leaving. "You'll hear from me soon, Private Miller," he said. "But for now, take some rest." Then he walked out, his expression still troubled. When Sarah was alone, she exhaled deeply, feeling the weight lift slightly from her shoulders. She had spent so long hiding her past, afraid it would define her. Now, at least one person knew the truth, but she didn't regret it. Outside the tent, the commander spoke quietly to the doctor. "Not a word about this leaves this tent," he said firmly. The doctor nodded. "Understood, sir." Harris walked away, deep in thought. For years, he had seen soldiers broken by trauma, but Sarah was different. She had rebuilt herself from ashes. Later that day, word began to spread among the recruits. No one knew the full story, but whispers filled the barracks. "Did you hear?" The commander called Miller in personally. "She's not just a regular recruit. She's someone important." The same people who used to mock her now looked at her differently. They noticed her silence wasn't weakness. It was strength. That evening, Sarah sat alone by the campfire. The orange flames reflected in her eyes as she held a small piece of cloth, an old band from her past unit, worn and faded. It was all she had left from that terrible day in Kandahar. She ran her thumb across the fabric and whispered under her breath, "I kept my promise." For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was hiding. The scar that once reminded her of pain now felt like proof of survival. She had faced death, and now she was facing life again on her own terms. From a distance, Commander Harris watched her quietly. He didn't say anything, but in his eyes was something new. Not pity, not curiosity, but respect. He finally understood who Sarah Miller really was. Not a weak recruit, not a fragile woman, but a soldier who had already seen the worst of war and still had the courage to begin again. The next morning, the camp buzzed with quiet whispers. Everyone had noticed the change in how the commander treated Sarah, though no one dared to ask why. Something had shifted. The commander, once distant and strict, now spoke to her with respect. Even the drill sergeants seemed to hold back a little when they barked orders in her direction. But Sarah didn't want special treatment. She wanted to earn her place like everyone else. That day, a new challenge awaited the recruits. A combat simulation. It was designed to test teamwork, quick decision-making, and courage under pressure. The field was set up like a real battlefield. Muddy ground, smoke grenades, loud explosions, and obstacles everywhere. The recruits were divided into two teams, each led by a chosen squad leader. To everyone's surprise, Commander Harris assigned Sarah as one of the team leaders. The announcement caused an immediate stir. "Her?" One of the recruits muttered loudly. "She's been here barely 2 months." Others exchanged doubtful looks, their pride wounded. They couldn't believe that the quiet girl they once mocked was now leading them. But the commander's tone was final. "Miller has proven herself. This exercise isn't about seniority. It's about ability." Sarah stood tall, though her heart raced. This was her chance, not just to prove herself to others, but to herself. Her team gathered around her, still skeptical. She studied the map quickly, her mind sharp and calm. "Listen up," she said, her voice steady. "We don't have time for arguments. We'll take the East Ridge first, set up a defensive line, and then flank from behind when the other team advances. Keep low, move fast, and communicate clearly. No one goes solo." The team looked at her, surprised by her confidence. Slowly they nodded. There was something in her tone, firm but calm, that made them trust her, even if they didn't want to admit it. The whistle blew and the simulation began. Smoke filled the air, and fake gunfire echoed across the training field. Sarah moved first, signaling her team to follow. She crawled through the mud, her uniform dirty, her eyes focused. Every step reminded her of real battles. The smell of smoke, the chaos, the sound of heartbeats pounding in fear. But she pushed those memories aside. This was different. This time, no one would die. Her team reached the ridge just in time. She quickly gave orders, directing 2 recruits to cover the left flank while another group moved up quietly on the right. They followed her lead without question now. She was calm under pressure, moving like someone who'd done this 100 times before. Then the other team struck. A sudden burst of firecrackers signaled an ambush. One of her teammates panicked and ran out from cover, exposing their position. Sarah reacted instantly. "Stay down!" she shouted, diving forward to pull him back behind a barrier. A simulated explosion went off nearby, throwing dirt into the air. The recruit she saved looked at her, shocked. You could have been hit," he stammered. Sarah just gave him a small smile. "You're part of my team," she said. "We look out for each other." From the observation post, Commander Harris watched everything through binoculars. His expression was unreadable, but deep down he felt proud. Sarah wasn't just performing well. She was leading with heart, something no training could teach. As the battle continued, Sarah's team began to gain ground. Her strategy worked perfectly. The enemy's main line was now vulnerable. She signaled her squad to advance. One by one, they moved forward, ducking and rolling through smoke, until they reached the final checkpoint. Sarah gave a silent hand signal, and her team launched the final assault, taking the position cleanly. The whistle blew again. The simulation was over. Silence filled the air as both teams gathered near the commander. Everyone was covered in mud and sweat, breathing heavily. Harris stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Team Bravo, led by Private Miller," he announced, "completed the mission in record time. Minimal losses, excellent coordination, and perfect execution." A few of the recruits looked at Sarah with wide eyes. For the first time, there was no mockery, only respect. Even those who had doubted her earlier clapped lightly, some even smiling. Sarah stood there quietly, her face calm, but inside, her heart was full. She didn't need applause. The real victory was seeing her team work together and trust her. The commander approached her and said quietly, "You led like a real soldier today. That's the kind of leadership we need here." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, her voice humble. "I just did what I had to." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Sarah sat near the training field, cleaning her boots. Her hands were sore, her uniform torn, but she felt stronger than ever. For the first time since she joined the camp, she felt like she truly belonged. A few of her teammates walked over. "Hey, Miller," one of them said, awkwardly scratching his head. "You were amazing out there." Another added, "Sorry for how we treated you before. Guess we were wrong." Sarah smiled gently. "It's okay," she said. "We're all here to learn. That's what Bootcamp is for." They sat together for a while, talking and laughing quietly, a rare moment of peace in the tough life of soldiers in training. The tension that once filled the air between them was gone, replaced by genuine respect. From a distance, Commander Harris watched the scene. He turned to the sergeant beside him and said, "You see that? That's what leadership looks like. Not shouting, not fear, but trust." The sergeant nodded. "She's something else, sir." That night, as Sarah lay in her bunk, she stared at the ceiling, thinking of how far she had come. Just weeks ago, she was the recruit everyone laughed at. Now, she was the one they looked up to. The journey hadn't been easy, but every bruise, every scar, physical and emotional, had brought her here. She closed her eyes with a quiet smile. For the first time in years, she wasn't haunted by her past. Instead, she was building a future, one where her strength, not her scars, defined her. The next week brought the toughest challenge of boot camp, the endurance and survival test. It was a multi-day field exercise in the mountains, designed to push every recruit to their physical and mental limit. They would have to hike through rough terrain, survive with limited supplies, and complete missions using only their training and teamwork. The commander's voice echoed across the field as he briefed them. Out there, you'll have no comfort, no shortcuts. Only your courage and discipline will keep you standing. Sarah listened carefully, her expression serious. She knew this kind of test. It reminded her of her old missions, where survival depended on quick thinking and steady nerves. But she also knew that this was different. Here, she wasn't a soldier fighting a war. She was proving herself to a team that had once doubted her. The recruits were split into small groups. Sarah was placed in the same team she had led before. Now her teammates trusted her completely. They began their journey at dawn, their heavy packs slung over their shoulders, the cold wind biting at their faces. The path ahead was rocky and steep. Every few minutes, someone slipped or stumbled, but Sarah was always there, offering a hand, a calm word, or a quick solution. Hours passed, and exhaustion began to set in. Some recruits complained about the lack of food and water, while others grew silent, saving their breath. Sarah noticed that one of the younger recruits, Ben, was limping slightly. She slowed down and walked beside him. "You okay?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Twisted my ankle back there. I can keep going, but it hurts." Without hesitation, Sarah adjusted her own backpack and said, "Give me some of your weight." Before he could protest, she took a few supplies from his pack and added them to hers. "We finish this together," she said firmly. The group kept moving step by step through the rough hills. When the sun began to set, they reached a small clearing where they could set up camp. Everyone was tired and hungry. The cold night wind made it even harder to rest. Some of the recruits argued over how to start a fire. Sarah quietly gathered dry twigs and leaves, shielded the small flame with her hands, and blew gently until it came to life. Within minutes, the group was huddled around the warm fire, grateful and silent. As they sat together, one of them finally spoke. "Miller," he said, "how do you stay so calm all the time? Don't you ever get scared?" Sarah looked into the fire, the flickering light reflecting in her eyes. After a long pause, she said softly, "Of course I get scared. Everyone does. But I learned something. Fear can't control you unless you let it. You face it, breathe through it, and move forward. That's how you survive." The group listened quietly. Her voice carried experience, not arrogance. It was clear she spoke from truth, not theory. For the first time, they saw not just a teammate, but a real soldier who had faced things far worse than a training camp. The next morning, the weather turned against them. Dark clouds rolled in, and soon heavy rain poured down, soaking everything. The trail became slippery, and the cold cut through their uniforms. Visibility was poor, and morale started to drop. One of the recruits lost his balance and almost fell down a steep slope, but Sarah reacted instantly, grabbing his arm and pulling him back with all her strength. Mud splashed across her face, but she didn't care. "Stay focused," she shouted over the rain. "Watch your step and stay close." The storm raged on, but she kept leading them, shouting encouragements, guiding them safely through the chaos. Even the toughest recruits followed her orders without question. The commander, watching their progress through binoculars from a nearby observation point, couldn't hide his admiration. "That woman's a force," he said quietly. By the third day, the group finally reached the checkpoint, exhausted, drenched, but together. When they arrived, the commander and the instructors were waiting. Many other teams had failed to finish or had lost members along the way. But Sarah's team had made it, every single one of them. As the commander walked toward them, the recruits straightened up. Their clothes were dirty, their boots covered in mud, but their eyes shone with pride. Harris looked at Sarah for a moment before speaking. "Team Bravo," he said. "You completed the course in the best time with 0 dropouts. That's something I haven't seen in years." The team cheered, some even clapping Sarah on the shoulder. She smiled, tired but proud. The commander continued, his voice carrying weight. "And Private Miller," he added, "your leadership out there was exceptional. You turned a group of exhausted recruits into a unit. That's what a real soldier does." Sarah saluted him sharply. "Thank you, sir." Later that night, as the camp rested, the commander visited her tent. She stood at attention when he entered. "At ease," he said, his tone softer than usual. He looked at her for a long moment before saying, "You remind me of someone I used to serve with. Strong, quiet, but unbreakable. I read your old file, Miller. You should have been decorated, not forgotten." Sarah looked down. "Sir, I didn't come here for recognition. I just wanted to feel like I was part of something again." Harris nodded slowly. "You've done more than that. You've reminded everyone here what real courage looks like." He paused, then added with a rare smile, "Tomorrow the general will visit. I think it's time he met the soldier who's changed my whole camp." After he left, Sarah sat alone for a moment, feeling the weight of his words. She thought of her old unit, the faces she had lost, the pain she had carried for so long. For years, that scar on her body had felt like a mark of shame. But now it was something else, a reminder of survival, of second chances. Outside, the wind blew softly through the camp. The recruits slept soundly, their trust in her unshakable. Sarah looked up at the night sky, stars shining faintly through the clouds, and whispered to herself, "This time, I won't run from who I am." She knew tomorrow would bring new challenges, and maybe, finally, recognition for the strength she had long kept hidden. But for now she felt peace. The laughter that once surrounded her had turned into respect. The girl they mocked at boot camp was now the soldier they looked up to. The sun rose slowly over the boot camp, casting a warm glow across the training fields. Today was different. Word had spread quietly among the recruits that a high-ranking general would visit to observe the final phase of training. Excitement and nervousness buzzed in the air. But for Sarah, it was another chance to prove herself. Not to anyone else, but to herself and to the person who had always doubted her abilities. The morning started with a series of drills, each more difficult than the last. Recruits ran obstacle courses, practiced tactical maneuvers, and completed physical endurance tests. Sarah moved with precision, guiding her team through each challenge. Her teammates followed without hesitation now, trusting her instincts and decisions completely. What had once been laughter and mockery had turned into admiration and respect. By mid-morning, the general arrived. He was tall, imposing, and his eyes seemed to look straight through anyone standing in front of him. Commander Harris introduced Sarah to him quietly. "General, this is Private Miller. She's been leading her team exceptionally during these exercises." The general's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at Sarah. "Private Miller," he said in a deep voice. "I hear you're quite the leader." Sarah stood at attention, her hands by her sides, her uniform neat despite the hours of training. "Yes, sir," she replied calmly, her voice steady. There was no arrogance in her tone, only quiet confidence. The general observed the final exercise, a simulated hostage rescue. Recruits had to navigate a complex terrain filled with obstacles, identify threats, and safely reach the target location. Sarah's team moved like a single unit. She signaled directions with small gestures, moved swiftly through the terrain, and kept an eye on her team members, ensuring no one fell behind. Halfway through the exercise, an unexpected complication occurred. One of the recruits fell into a muddy pit, twisting an ankle badly. Panic spread briefly among the others, but Sarah reacted immediately. She knelt beside the injured recruit, assessing the situation quickly. "Stay calm," she said. "I've got you. Hold my hand and lean on me." With careful movements, she guided him out of the pit, supporting his weight and keeping him balanced. The other recruits followed her lead, helping where needed. Even in the face of unexpected challenges, Sarah's calm and decisive actions ensured the mission continued smoothly. The general watched from a distance, his expression changing. There was surprise, then respect, and finally something that resembled awe. By the time they reached the target, Sarah's team had completed the mission flawlessly. The general approached, his eyes fixed on her. He paused for a moment, then asked quietly, "Private Miller, that scar on your arm, where did it come from?" The team looked at her, curious. Sarah's hand instinctively brushed the sleeve of her shirt, covering the faint but long scar running across her upper arm. She took a deep breath, knowing this moment was inevitable. "Sir," she said softly, "it's from my time in combat. I was part of a mission overseas, and an explosion injured me. I recovered and joined this training program to continue serving." The general's expression changed instantly. He studied her closely, as if trying to measure the depth of her courage and experience. "I see," he said slowly. "No one told me you had combat experience. That explains your skill and composure under pressure." Sarah kept her eyes on the ground, staying respectful but firm. "Yes, sir. I didn't want to let my past define me. I wanted to show that I could earn respect here through my actions, not my history." The general nodded, clearly impressed. "You've earned more than respect, Private Miller. You've shown leadership, courage, and resilience beyond what I expect from most seasoned soldiers. Your team trusts you completely. That's remarkable." Commander Harris stepped forward, his face a mix of pride and admiration. "General, she's been exceptional. I've been watching her since day one. She's quiet, but her actions speak louder than any words could. She's the reason her team succeeded in every exercise, even under extreme conditions." The general's gaze returned to Sarah. "You've faced real danger before, and yet here you are, leading a team through challenges even veterans would struggle with. That takes more than skill. It takes heart." Sarah's chest tightened slightly at the acknowledgement, but she kept her composure. She didn't need to boast. The recognition itself was enough. Around her, the recruits, who had once laughed at her, now looked at her with admiration and even a touch of awe. Later, the general held a brief meeting with the commanders and sergeants. "I want you to take note of Private Miller," he said. "She's the kind of soldier every unit needs. Disciplined, brave, and capable of bringing people together. Consider her a model for others." After the meeting, Sarah walked back to her quarters. She felt a mixture of relief and quiet pride. The recognition she had long avoided had finally arrived, not through words or medals, but through the respect of those who understood real courage. That night, as she sat by herself, she traced the scar on her arm, the same one that had remained hidden for so long. It was more than a mark of pain. It was proof of survival, of resilience, and of her journey from fear to strength. She whispered softly to herself, "I've come full circle. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." Outside, Commander Harris watched her quietly from a distance, smiling. He knew the recruits would never look at her the same way again. She had faced mockery, doubt, and extreme trials, and emerged as a true leader. But what impressed him most wasn't just her skill or courage. It was her unwavering heart, her ability to carry her past with grace while still pushing forward. For Sarah, the journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more missions, and more tests of her resolve. But now, she knew one thing clearly. She had earned her place, not just in the eyes of her commanders, but in her own heart. She was no longer the recruit they laughed at. She was a soldier, strong, respected, and unstoppable. And as the moonlight touched her face, Sarah finally allowed herself a small, content smile. She had fought battles in the past, endured pain, and faced doubt. Now, she stood tall, scar and all, ready for whatever lay ahead. Her hidden strength had finally been seen, and the world, or at least her small corner of it, had gone silent in awe.